Welcome to everybody to come back to our summit, and I'm going to turn it over to, so let me back up. So we're going to do in the next 45 minutes. Our next panel is on leveraging blockchain and digital assets for social impact. So we talked about stable coins and central bank digital currencies and who's going to regulate what. Now we're going to talk about how it might be used for good. So I'm going to turn it over to the moderator, Diana, and thanks to everybody for being part of the panel. You're on mute.
Thank you. So welcome everyone to this panel. I'm Diana. I'm the head of research and sustainability at the Global Blockchain Business Council. And I'm really excited about this conversation because it is because of the blockchain use cases in cryptocurrencies and in business related aspects in many ways. And because of how transformational they have been, that they've had a great role showing us the social impact they can have. And as GBBC has seen through its membership base and through its building bridges across the blockchain ecosystem, there are many use cases that can really harness the potential for blockchain to do good. Among the most valuable examples of blockchain implementations, and many examples include across the board, the circular economy, combating poverty, reducing ocean plastics, and environmental issues. And this session will explore with amazing panelists how they are each doing work to advance these use cases and examples. And I'm joined here, I'll give a quick introduction for the panelists. I'm joined here with Marcina Tilleman, Vice President of Circle Impact, Hila Cohen, the Head of Business Development and Chief of Staff at the World Food Program's Innovation Accelerator, Irene Arias Hoffman, the CEO of IDB Lab, and Elizabeth Magombo Kagbe, Innovations and New Initiatives Lead at Heifer International. So let's get started. So starting with the first question, what areas or sectors do you think blockchain and related digital assets would have the greatest social impact and why? And I'm going to start with Marcina and your experience with Circle Impact.
Thank you so much, Diana. And it is really a privilege to be here with all of you. And I have so much respect and admiration for all of the work that my fellow panelists do. I am obviously coming from a private sector perspective, so it will be a little bit different, but digital assets and crypto assets are really key to unlocking a long overdue transformation in commerce. But the ease of access can create challenges. And the promise of wealth creation and the democratization of finance will never be realized unless consumers are equipped with the tools and information they need to make informed decisions about how to engage with financial technology. So as a company, Circle has made a really concerted effort to work in the space of digital financial literacy. We view this as a real opportunity and an obligation to actively drive this literacy across a spectrum of actors. And we've done this in a few different ways. I'm going to speak to a few examples really quickly and then hand things over to my probably much more capable panelists, fellow panelists. But in the spring, we launched a partnership with a historically Black college in Maryland, as well as a university in South Africa. And the program focuses on community engagement and digital financial literacy. It's funded by the US Diplomatic Mission to South Africa and is part of an expanding university partnership initiative. And we're also supporting those students this fall. The program is going to expand to include many other HBCUs across the region and other academic institutions. We've created this curriculum which actually is required for all Circle employees. It's relatively sophisticated. And as these students go through this curriculum, they'll be fed into pipelines for internship opportunities and employment opportunities at Circle and with our partners. And we view this as an opportunity for really sustainable development that isn't just a semester long, but rather something that will lead to real economic mobility and opportunity. And we see a huge opportunity in the education space, but also upskilling workers more generally. And I will pause there.
And moving on to Irene, I know that you have a very specific geographic focus. Can you give us a perspective on how Latin American implementations are taking form?
Thank you, Diana, and thank you to GBBC and to the American University for hosting this panel and bringing us together with the other co-panelists. And we have actually a lot in common. We have a number of use cases that we've developed together. So it's great. It's great to be with all of you. I'm speaking from the perspective of IDB Lab. I'm the CEO of IDB Lab, the innovation laboratory of the Inter-American Development Bank. So indeed, we do focus on the 26 countries of Latin America and the Caribbean in which we operate. As part of the largest development finance provider, we are promoting under the group vision, which is Vision 2025, that has as main focus the sustainable recovery of the region, to use technology and innovation as a tool to find new ways of solving the persistent problems. And that's where we became really very focused on how to accelerate adoption of the benefits that blockchain has. Already back in 2019, we had a number of use cases and many sectors, but we realized just planting individual trees was not enough. And we could, as a neutral entity, take on a larger role of becoming a bit of a hub for what today is the Global Alliance for the Development of the Blockchain Ecosystem in Latin America and the Caribbean, LACChain. And that allowed us to level the playing field and create the conditions for much more rapid adoption of blockchain for utility. And today we have 65 cases. More than 40 of them are specifically addressing social inclusion aspects, like financial inclusion. And we have some projects together with Hyper on the agricultural value chains in cocoa and coffee, as well as with World Food Program Accelerator in Peru, for example, for digital identity, using using blockchain for Venezuelan migrants to be able to receive subsidies for food. And there are many more cases, but I think the key message is that orchestrating such an alliance has allowed us to build a public permission network, on top of which then many entities already together, more than 100, can build solutions on top.
Excellent, excellent. Moving on to Elizabeth, given that your organization is very values-based and very focused on a holistic community development approach, these are complex global problems when we talk about sustainable development. Where have you found it easiest to implement blockchain solutions?
Thank you so much, Diana. And it's an honor to be here with all of these amazing panelists. For us, we have a number of use cases. The first one is in supporting financial inclusion. As we might be aware, 1.7 billion people in the world remain unbanked, and that constitutes the majority of smallholder farmers, the communities that we work with. This limits the ability of the farmers to access inputs which they need to invest in their production practices and increase their yield, and thereby increase their income. And so this keeps them trapped in a cycle of poverty, because they cannot access the investment that they need to break out of the poverty. And so one of the use cases that we are working on is supporting the farmers with access to verifiable reputation that will enable them to access financing for investing in their production. We are doing this by tokenizing the different behavior operations that the farmers undertake in their field. Because one of the other key challenges is also that the operations of the majority of the smallholder farmers remain invisible, and this makes it difficult for them to access investment. So by tokenizing these operations and linking them to a verifiable reputation matrix, we want to support them to access financing, because this reputation can be used by financial institutions to get a level of understanding into the operations of smallholder farmers and also their ability to pay back on any financial obligations that they may have. Another use case that we're looking at is, as Erin had said, in developing of a digital ecosystem, that we're already laying down some of the foundations that are required for onboarding the farmers into a blockchain system. And so we'd like to utilize this system to enable them to access insurance, so that we help them to safeguard the investment that they're making in the production practices, that in the event of adverse events, they are able to remain resilient and bounce back. And so we are linking the farmers to blockchain-based weather index insurance, so that they can be protected against adverse effects of weather, which with climate change have become more and more common. Another use case is improving the farmers' access to markets and better pricing by providing supply chain traceability, so that, as I was saying, that one of the challenges for the farmers is that their operations remain invisible, and that is the same even when we come to the supply chain aspect. So is to provide supply chain traceability, which can enable the farmers access better markets and also get access to more equitable pricing. Thank you.
Fantastic. These are already incredible examples, and we can think of a whole world of many more in the future. Moving it on to Hila, you work a lot with builders through the innovation program that you're involved in. And because builders are so in touch with the actual implementations and getting things done, in what areas have you seen the use cases to be the most effective?
Thanks so much for this question, and thank you for inviting me to this session. I'm not only talking on behalf of myself, but in behalf of the team from the Accelerator, and also other WP teams that are working on blockchain, and also of our portfolio teams. So it's really exciting to be here. Just to mention a few words about WFP. So WFP is a United Nations agency. We operate in more than 100 countries and territories, and we're first responders in many emergency situations. You would imagine that we would only distribute physical food, but a growing part of our work is providing cash to families so that they can make the choice of what food they buy for their families. And this is and so with these 2 points of physical food distribution and cash-based transfers, some of our blockchain work comes into play. Another element where our blockchain work comes into play is working with smallholder farmers. As others have mentioned, these are unfortunately the people who are growing our food sometimes have the least, let's say, reliable access to healthy and nutritious food on an ongoing basis, because they're really affected by climate shocks and man-made conflict. But let me deep dive into the blockchain cases that we have. So first of all, as you mentioned, we run an innovation accelerator, and we, as a UN agency, work with different startups, so they can apply to our accelerator program, they can go through a boot camp, and they also can get funding to work directly with WFP in the field. So we've worked with a number of startups with, let's say, blockchain technology that back them up. We've worked with them in Jordan and in Kenya and in other locations as well. And in most use cases, there's been work to support smallholder farmers. Other use cases, and probably one of our most famous implementations of blockchain, is building blocks. And building blocks relates to giving creating, let's say, wallet on a blockchain to give cash transfers in different situations. So this is actually a very interesting project because I think it can be also an inspiration for the listeners. Building Blocks started with an idea 6 years ago. Human Haddad, I was working with him in a boot camp, so I remember it very vividly. We were really exploring what could be the use case of blockchain. And today we talk about it in a much more comfortable manner. You know, where 6 years ago, you know, the environment was slightly different. I think also in the impact area and the openness to this topic. And he was a finance officer, had an idea how to implement this, understood the problem, because I think that's a key thing, understanding the problem that you're trying to solve. He really understood how the mechanics of cash-based transfers work in WFP. And then we did research to see how this could work within our sector. And Building Blocks started with an idea. Then we did a first pilot in Pakistan with 100 people. Then, and while this all the support of the Accelerator and initial funding, today, going a few years after, Building Blocks has reached 1 million people. Building Blocks is active in Lebanon, in Jordan, in Afghanistan, and now also in the Ukraine. And it has different use cases and has developed with time. But every time the use cases has expanded, it's because we understood the real problem. And one interesting fact that I wanted to say is that in just to date, we have processed more than 397 million in cash transfers through Building Blocks. So for those listening that you have an initial idea linked to blockchain, it's really interesting to see the potential that you can reach.
Wow, and that's a huge testament also to the role of collaboration, because these technologies focus so much on decentralized participation of the communities, the benefiting directly the users through those direct forms of transfer and exchange of value or whatever it may be. And collaboration also requires alignment across stakeholders. And my next question is, how important is the issue of trust in leveraging blockchain and digital assets for social impact? And when we talk about the use cases for cryptocurrencies being predicated on transactions, this is without a trusted third party. We're talking peer-to-peer direct transactions. And social impact efforts are inherently very relationship-based around trust. So how does this work? And does the technology's trustless aspect work for or against the effectiveness of this space? Maybe Marcina, could you give some insight on some of the key partnerships that have been foundational for the work that you do?
Of course, yeah, and the issue of trust is really fundamental to blockchain technology. As the historian Yuval Harari observed, at its core, the chronicle of human progress is a story of trust and cooperations. And before societies can solve big problems, individuals must trust each other to agree on a basic framework of facts surrounding things like identity and property ownership and the validity of transactions. Obviously, governments and financial institutions have historically served as the custodians of the information that makes up this base layer of our shared reality. And worldwide, we've seen an erosion of trust over the last several years. I think recent numbers suggest that 85% of people say their institutions are not working well for them, which leads to just a collapse of confidence that undermines the bedrock of shared understanding that supports traditional structures and collaboration in every part of society. Because of its transparency and open source nature, blockchain technology does present interesting solutions to pieces of this problem. And I'm going to speak to one partnership and one example of kind of the role of trust, because we call blockchain a trustless machine, and we also call it a trust machine, and they kind of mean the same thing, but the role of human relationships is integral, no matter how you're addressing it. So during COVID, Circle was approached with a significant challenge, which was, could we help the legitimate elected government of Venezuela distribute needed aid to frontline medical workers in Venezuela as they battled coronavirus, while suffering from the impacts of hyperinflation, international isolation, and sanctions, and the economic collapse due to Nicolas Maduro's policies. And my colleague Caroline Hill spoke to this a little bit, but I'm going to get into a bit of detail because I think it's really interesting. Medical supplies and equipment were scarce, and the import-export market had been totally destroyed by currency and capital controls. Wages paid to healthcare workers evaporated quickly, which meant that they were starving as well as the citizens of Venezuela were starving. And it was an incredibly dire situation. Against this backdrop, Circle was able to work with partners in the US government and others to create an aid disbursement pipeline that leveraged the power of USDC, our dollar-denominated digital currency, to bypass the controls imposed by the dictator in Venezuela, and ultimately put millions of dollars of funds in the hands of people fighting for the health and safety of the people of Venezuela. And so that's one example of the way that trusted actors, when brought together, can make a tremendous difference. And we have other partnerships related to the work that Aid Tech is doing with Save the Children, and others that is really exciting, but I'm going to pause because I know others have a lot to say on this as well.
Yeah, that's great. I'm going to move it to Irene now, and I know you have a perspective on the different types of blockchains. There's different networks that can range from private to permissioned, and what's your take on how that structure of relationships, particularly permissioned public networks, can leverage the role of trust for this type of collaborations?
Yes, so of course, I think we all agree that trust is essentially for any blockchain use case, but in particular, we realized over time, since we started building this global alliance for the development of blockchain in the region, that publicly permissioned networks are particularly suited for the purpose that we have, which is to enable and make very cost efficient the deployment of use cases with social impact. So we published in 2021 the LACchain framework for permissioned public networks, and anyone who's interested can look in LACchain.net, that publication, and it spells out why public permission networks can help, in particular, address the issue of accountability, of being compliant with regulation, because we want the utility aspect of this technology, but we want to make sure that it's done in a way that's scalable and that's stable as well. And so that aspect is important. That is, of course, fully transparent, zero transaction fees, and eco-friendly, as well as respecting the user's data privacy. So all these attributes we felt in the permission public networks are brought together. And I wanted to also add that the collaboration aspect, Diana, that you mentioned is essential, and there is a role for different institutions in this. At the end of the day, like, for example, if you want to use it for the creation of tokenized value of land registry, that then can be transacted in a way that is disintermediated on blockchain. First, you had to create the first. You need a trusted entity for all the actors to create that tokenized representation. So all the stakeholders engaged later in the transaction of those tokens understand and trust the value, and so there is a role, and I think that having built together these open source common infrastructure is really powerful, because then the case that Hila mentioned of the building blocks is the one, for example, used in the case that I mentioned in Peru and can run on this digital highway. So you don't have to waste efforts and resources trying to figure out on which network to run it and which are the conditions and which is the trust and the accountability and the governance framework that is applied. You can trust that is there. And in particular, in the case of blockchain, we have 11 countries that have already developed ecosystems around it. You know that it's going to be compliant, and that it can leverage three things: this public permission network, the digital ID, and eventually in more and more countries, tokenized fiat currency as well. So that all of these use cases that we've been mentioning can run on a common network, and we don't have, again, sort of wasted resources trying to figure out and build a fraction independent infrastructures.
That's right, Irene. You raised the point. There is a need for common frameworks in order to even get all these dispersed stakeholders to work together more closely. And you've alluded to projects in Haiti, Honduras, and Ecuador with reference to a cacao project in partnership with Heifer International. Elizabeth, can you make additional points on how that collaboration has worked out on your end, specifically with respect to advancing financial inclusion?
Yes, to build on what Erin has said, collaboration for us at Heifer is very important because we realize that it is very difficult for any one entity to try and achieve our mission, which is ending hunger and poverty. So it is important for us to leverage on the work that other like-minded organizations are doing. And so in Honduras, we partnered with IDB, Farmer Connect, and IBM Food Trust in the development of a supply chain traceability system for cacao and coffee farmers. This is to enable them have access to better markets, but then also proponent for the development of a more equitable price so that the farmers can have increased income. We also partnered with Cartier, which is a research institution, to support in the development of an advisory system that will support the farmers to improve their productivity, so that we're working on both increasing their volumes and also improving their market access. In other aspects of collaboration, we have partnered with IBM, and we're part of their Sustainability Accelerator, where we're working with them to develop a digital extension solution in Malawi, which is going to enable us to tokenize the farming operation so that farmers can have access to verifiable digital reputation that will enable them to have access to finance for investment in their production practices. Thank you.
That's great. That's great. And turning to Hila, you've also collaborated with IDB Labs with a project in Peru built on the blockchain network. Could you describe that collaboration and also the role of trust with regard to especially the use of piloting stablecoins and how you've leveraged the different stakeholders to work together?
Sure. So with the great team at IDB Labs, we're looking into two activities right now. One is in Guatemala, and it's linked to school meals. School meals is when you provide meals at schools, and that encourages children to stay in the educational system for a longer period of time. In Guatemala, we are testing together and looking into with IDB Labs on notarizing the spending linked to the budget of school meals. And as Irene mentioned, right now for Peru, we're looking into cash-based transfers for Venezuelan immigrants and local vulnerable communities. So I'm sure this will develop into exciting things, and maybe next year we'll have more updates to share. In terms of our the element of trust, I think for us, I think trust comes into play within the network, but I think also as a international organization like WFP, there's different elements of trust. You need to create trust within your organization to work and look into frontier technologies like blockchain, like artificial intelligence. And we have a dedicated team for that with the blockchain and AI experts. And in that sense also, that is also the bridge. You create the, you increase the awareness of these technologies, but you also need to bring practical use cases. And this is where our accelerator comes into play and brings different types of, let's say, startups to work with us. One example, we have a project called Impact. And Impact is about connecting vulnerable populations to the digital economy. For many of us probably in this session, being a freelancer is a term that is very, well known. But for many people in vulnerable situations, they are many times trained to be a baker or maybe to be a hairdresser, but there's a limit of how many of those people with that type of training that you need. And the digital world enables us to create more inclusiveness. So with Impact, we're not only training people about digital skills, we're also connecting them to digital job opportunities. And as part of that, in Kenya, as part of the Impact project that we've been running for a few years and is a number of countries already like Iraq, Lebanon, and Kenya. In Kenya, what we tested was the payment to students for their work using stablecoins. And also based on that, also giving them access to other financial tools, for example, loans at more affordable rates. So we're testing this. I think for us, stable coins is something that we need to assess with which stable coin we'll work with and what are the different use cases that we will work with them.
Great. Now let's talk about key tools in order for this to happen. When we think of implementation and really getting things done, what currency this runs on. We're going to implement peer-to-peer value transfers and the role of stablecoins, particularly Circle. You've been at the forefront of this field. In many ways, everyone else has to catch up in order to be at the collaborate and be part of this, right? It's a whole new world that has an incredible world of opportunities. Marcina, can you give us insight on the use of the stablecoin USDC, why it's important, and its structure?
Absolutely. And I think it's really important to distinguish the stablecoins that are actually currency-backed. So USDC is dollar-backed, dollar-denominated for every single USDC that Circle has. We also have a US dollar or US Treasury bond to back it, and it can be redeemable at any time. So that's really critical because these are not instruments for investment or there's no volatility or fluctuation. It's tied to the US economy and the US dollar. And for these different populations that we're working with, you really need something that's reliable, that's solid, that's not going to be losing value or not going to be an instrument for investment necessarily, but that will just work when you need it to work. And what we found is that it's incredibly valuable to have a system that is always on, that's not constrained by the traditional banking calendar. Crises don't take bank holidays, and you need to have tools that can work whenever they're needed. And we've also seen in various places around the world, whether it's Ukraine or Afghanistan, that sometimes traditional banking structures falter. And these tools can be incredible instruments for getting value where you need it to be, when you need it to be there. There's an additional level of traceability and transparency that can be extremely valuable. And of course, you always need to be working with meaningful and trusted partners to ensure that you know exactly where those funds are being dispersed on the ground. But the rails are very important. And for Circle, we were founded on the mission of raising global economic prosperity through the frictionless exchange of financial value. And it's exciting to see these use cases come to fruition around the world and to see how USDC can be used to address different conflicts and crises that emerge.
Excellent. Now, Hila, when you think of the design of a blockchain solution, as in any other technology, and the importance of focusing on the critical problems, where do you see the types of blockchains and the infrastructure, the different aspects of this technology being implemented in the most useful ways for social impact?
So for us, we don't assess let's say the biggest problem at the accelerator level. You know, we are an accelerator that is in service of a quite large organization. So we're always in touch with our country offices to understand what are the most critical problems that they face. And then we do, let's say, an assessment or an aggregation exercise, because then we can match the most relevant solutions to them. Right? I think what we want to avoid is bringing in a technology because we get excited of it, but it doesn't actually solve a problem. So that's the first thing that we do. Our direct access to our network of country offices around the world is very important to us. The second element also, I think, is understanding the actual problem. We work a lot with human-centered design. So, you know, you can have an assumption of what is the problem that you're trying to solve from Hila's point of view, but that's not the relevant one, right? It's whoever for whom you're solving the problem that we really need to understand. And then we try, based on the problems that we see, the solutions that are out there, and then we do the matchmaking. So we're actually, our Frontiers Innovation team is actually looking at now at different use cases, whether it's supporting smallholder farmers, whether it's traceability on supply chain, whether it's insurance, let's say blockchain, like blockchain payments triggered by shocks that trigger insurance. So we're looking at different use cases, but again, it really depends on the specific country need that we see.
And in the emerging economies, it's also important to have a basic internet connectivity. Taking it to Elizabeth, what are your thoughts on the importance of basic technology in order for us to even think of implementing blockchain solutions?
It is very important because that forms the foundation of the solutions. And so access to infrastructure on which solutions like blockchain can be built is very important. Internet connectivity, I can also think around access to power to enable powering of the systems. It's also very important. And also the literacy for the targets communities to engage with the blockchain solutions is also important. I'm thinking of an example that we have come across in the program that we are developing in Malawi, is that part of the infrastructure that we need is orbital imagery, and it's not as easily accessed in the global south as it is in other areas. And so that limits what solutions you can build. But I think that also creates the opportunity to collaborate with organizations that can provide such solutions to make them more readily available to the people that need them the most.
Absolutely. Now, when we think of how things can go wrong, there's a lot that can go wrong in this type of project specifically. There's a lot of risks. How big is the issue of fraud and waste in the social impact space? many good intentions are necessary, but we have to also be realistic that there can be corruption, there can be poor underlying infrastructure, the implementations may be much far less than ideal. And Irene, what's your insight on what can go wrong and how to account for it?
Yeah, well, well, first of all, I think it's important just to underline what Hila earlier was saying, why you're doing it in the first place, and make sure that at least amongst the organizations involved with the aim of generating more inclusion and improvement of lives, that we put people at the center of it. So that's number one. I think the empowerment of people, because at the end is what Web3 is bringing about, is this ability to give people control over their digital credentials, their tokens, being able to not rely on others to exchange that value. Secondly, to build, ensuring that there is full accessibility, and you've touched on it, Elizabeth commented on it just now. Thirdly, guaranteeing data privacy, and fourthly, cross-border interoperability. Those are 4 elements that we're seeing across the board as essentials in order to make this as close to the why, to ensuring that we use this technology to extract the most value out of it. But yes, in implementing it, there can be cases where you are building it on a reality that has a lot of flaws, and so you don't want to just put a layer and transfer all those flaws in the sort of analog world into this digital world. You want to also address that. So in particular, we have had several very interesting use cases in improving government practices using this technology to just get at the core of it. One had to do with the disbursement of even our own projects, because I think we have to also walk the talk. So using blockchain actually is a project in Honduras with Profib that is working in the standardization of the fiduciary processes and providing the using blockchain for improving the transparency and the traceability of payments and making them much more verifiable and much more efficient. And a second example is on public procurement, and that's an example in Peru that is in full production, and it's increasing the transparency and the security of that the data has not been modified and by the certifying officers, etc. And this is verified through a QR code and has provided an extra layer of trust and transparency on something as big as public procurement.
Well, excellent. We only have a few more minutes, so I'm going to go to all of you one by one with final thoughts. I'm going to give you 2 options for a question to answer. Either what excites you the most about opportunities ahead in blockchain for social impact, or are there any misconceptions about social impact and blockchain that you would like to dispel? So let's start with Marcina.
Thank you, Diana. I'm going to go with the first option of what excites me about what's ahead. I think we've seen over the last decade a tremendous amount of innovation and growth. And over the next decade, we're going to be focusing a lot more on the benefits as opposed to the underlying technology. We're going to be seeing these solutions that have been scaled, see the real benefits from them, and we'll be less fixated on how they're happening and more fixated on what they're doing and the people that they're actually helping.
Great. Irene.
I'll go with what is, I think, exciting ahead as well. And I think we've gone again from planting individual trees to really developing the ecosystem so that this can be taken to scale. And if we
Elizabeth.
I'll also go with what excites me. I believe that the solutions have promise for providing a leapfrog for helping poor and rural communities to graduate out of poverty. And for me, I find that exciting that we can with deliberate efforts, we can ensure that they are not being left behind as it has been in the past evolutions where they have been left out of most of the system. But what I see is that now there's a good emphasis on social impact to ensure that the systems that are being developed are also considering the different contexts and situations of like smallholder farmers and poor communities to ensure that the solutions also work for them.
And finally, Hila.
So I'll go about, let's say, the urban myth side of things. I think it's, I would really recommend to anyone looking at impact and innovation to really understand the problem. There's so much resources to learn today about the specific problems. You know, many organizations like our have very public information, right? So I think there's a lot of tools to educate yourself, to understand the context of the problems that you're trying to solve. But I think also I think the topic, I think we've mentioned it here. I think we need to think about what is the next generation of blockchain and how it will be more inclusive and also protect the needs of some of the most, you know, poor people on the planet. You know, I think we sometimes, you know, look at the future from specific angles, but I think if more and more people look at it from an inclusive angle, I think it will also enable more adoption. So I think it's really my key thing is really know the problem that you're solving, and then you'll probably find the right partner, whether it's WFP, IDB, Hypher, or Circle. You will find the right entity to work with.
Well, this was a fantastic conversation. Thank you to all of you for your amazing insights, and we will leave it to the next panel.